Hi, Tara. Can you hear me okay? No, maybe not.
I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me, Tommy. Thanks. Tara, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, so you sound good. That's great. If you want to go ahead and just test your sharing and make sure that's working,
Yeah,
since
for sure.
Teams is fun sometimes.
Yeah, we're a Zoom family over here, so this is new to me. Does that work?
Awesome, that looks great. And do you have any like sound or animations or anything you want to test? Otherwise, you're set.
I think. Let me see if I have any videos. I think just this one. Let me see. It works. Huzzah!
Awesome.
Okay.
And it
Should
looks
be good.
good. Okay,
Awesome.
great. Well, we typically get started about 3 minutes or so after the hour, so you're welcome to keep your share up and stuff until then. But
Okay.
we'll introduce you in a couple minutes.
Sounds good.
Hey, this is Kate in the APL room. Just wanted to do a quick sound check with you guys.
Yep, I can hear you, Kate. Sound good?
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to step away for 1 second. I forgot my phone, so I'll be right back. And
Okay. Thanks for joining, everyone. As usual, we'll get started in about another minute or so as we let everyone pop over from their previous meetings. Thanks for joining.
okay, it was a little staticky for me a moment ago. Could maybe Tara, do you mind saying something?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, staticky for me. Let me try one.
Yeah, it sounds great to
Could
me,
you
so
try
maybe
saying
it's
something again?
Yes. Testing, testing.
Okay, now I don't hear you, so let me switch back. Okay, now say something again one more time.
How about now? Is that better?
Yeah, no. I think I'm gonna connect to the other port on my computer. So give me 1 second.
Yeah, you sound great online, so
Yeah,
sounds like it's a room
I think
issue.
it's just this overhead speaker thing. I'm sorry. 1 second.
Okay. Tara, do you mind saying something one more time?
Yep. How about now? Better?
Yay, excellent. Okay.
Hooray.
Hooray. Okay. Okay. Let me just pull up here. Start us off. No, it's the summertime. We super appreciate giving a talk today, and yeah, we got decent numbers for summertime. So let me okay, so I will give you a little brief introduction to get us started here. So it is with great pleasure that I get to introduce our speaker for today. We will hear from Dr. Tara Tomlinson, who is a planetary scientist focused on the microscale structure and behavior of impure ices. Her PhD is from Dartmouth, where she examined how the properties of saline ice emerge from coupled interactions among composition, microstructure, and thermodynamic conditions with direct implications for modeling ice shell dynamics, interpreting geophysical observations like ones from Clipper, and assessing habitability on icy ocean worlds. She's currently a postdoc researcher and lecturer at the Thayer School of Engineering at Dartmouth. So without further ado, please take it away.
All right, I will do that. Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you for Kate and Aaron for inviting me. I'm happy to speak with everybody today about Europa, my favorite place in the whole solar system. So I'm going to be, as Kate mentioned, talking about porosity and permeability development and how it influences properties of Europa's ice shell. Again, I am Dr. Tara Tomlinson, and I am here at the Thayer School of Engineering at Dartmouth. Let me get to my, sorry, hold on a moment. All right, so since I understand we have some summer interns in attendance today, they asked me to share a little bit about my background and how I got to where I am in planetary science. So you'll notice here, I did not start out with a degree in science or even a whole lot of formal science education at all. In fact, when I was growing up and where I was growing up, it was very much still a girls can't do science kind of culture. So I didn't, even though I was really in love with science and I love sci-fi and I love nature and all of that, they pushed me out of it. And so I got a degree originally in Old English with a minor in Russian studies, the complete opposite probably of most science degrees. After that, I spent a little bit of time, about 10 years, just bouncing around in different industries. I worked in film as a screenwriter and costumer for a while. I got into the for-profit education sector, I did business administration and project management there. And that lasted about 10 years or so. But eventually, luckily, a friend of mine, I was out at a bar one night and complaining about work. And he asked me, if you could do any job in the whole world, what would you do? And I said, I would go back to school to study astronomy. And that never really left my brain. So just a couple of years later, I decided to actually do just that. So I dropped everything, moved to Colorado, sight unseen, and registered at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And that's where my planetary science journey sort of began. I earned my bachelor's degree there, so a second bachelor's degree in astronomy and planetary science with a geology minor. Spent 5 years there working with Dr. Paul Hayne at LASP, studying craters on Europa and some other lunar crater type things. While I was there, I was lucky enough to get to spend those 5 years at the Fisk Planetarium in Boulder as a presenter, trainer, outreach coordinator, doing lots of really, really fun stuff for them. If you've never been to the Fisk Planetarium, go to Boulder and check it out. It's the coolest. But after that, 2020 happened and we took another couple of years break, but came back, finished my PhD at Dartmouth here in engineering. My degree is in materials science, specifically in ice mechanics. Unless you think that people, oh, hello.
I'm so sorry to bother you, but it does appear that your slides are a little blurry to to us. I don't know,
Oh.
maybe you could just unshare and try resharing or something.
Yeah, let me do that.
Sorry.
Oh, no, no worries. Is that any better?
It's loading. Oh, yes. Oh, no, it was for like a moment and then it went blurry again.
Oh no.
I don't know why.
I
That was weird.
Yeah, it was like, it was fine for a moment.
let me
Just try one.
to do this.
Are you sharing like your screen versus like a window? Maybe try the opposite.
I'm sharing a window. Let me see.
Try the
We'll
screen.
share the screen. 1 moment. Let me try that. Is that better?
No.
Dang.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not sure what to do.
It's a new.
Oh, someone said they saw it get blurry after we started the recording, but I don't know.
The recording starts automatically, so at the top of the meeting. So it's been recording this whole time.
Would people go out of presentation mode just for a moment and see if like when you're in like the regular slides, does that make any difference?
Looks like everything is blurry now, which is weird because when you first started sharing, it was not. You could, maybe try turning off your camera as Tommy suggests.
That's
just make sure it's not a bandwidth issue.
Sorry, I'm clicking back and forth between windows.
Yeah.
Is that any better?
Not seeing the share yet. Okay, it's loading. No, it's not any better, unfortunately.
Oh no.
Sometimes it's like, sometimes things will get blurry if you switch to another application, like if you go into the Teams application from PowerPoint, it sometimes loses focus on PowerPoint. I've seen that, but that doesn't seem to be the situation. So, I don't know, that's the only thing I could think of.
We could switch to a Zoom link real quick and I don't know, send that out, but.
Or have
It
us send the
would be
presentation.
easier to
to you.
email this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, send the slides.
email to you, Kate. I think sometimes JPL takes a longer time to get them through.
Oh, and then
then
I
you
could
could share
I
it.
could share them. Would that work
Yeah.
for you, Tara? If you want to
Sorry, say that again?
email them to me and I could share them for you while you speak to them.
Yeah, sure.
She have your email?
Yes.
Okay.
They are on the way.
Okay, great. Let's see. And you can maybe stop sharing. Tara, and I'll take over. As soon as I see them, come on, electrons. Still not getting that yet. It's a big file, maybe.
Yeah, it's pretty big.
Yeah.
So much for APL
Yeah,
faster.
we should have said
Yeah, I was gonna say,
both. I know
how big
both
is
are
it? Is it gonna get bounced?
I think it was 24K.
That should work for us.
It should be okay, yeah.
It's 30, right? For
Well, in the meantime, you can turn your camera back on since that wasn't the issue, so we can still see your face.
All right. I'm still here.
So can we get going with the slides as they are and then transition to
maybe.
higher res?
Sure, we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to do that?
And I'm sorry, we interrupted your intro, so if you want to finish.
Quite all right. That part was almost done. Here, let me jump.
What's happening? It's not coming through. Maybe just in the meantime, also real quick, just send it off to Erin as well, just in case it gets to her
Yeah.
somehow. Okay.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Tara. Yeah.
Oh, totally fine. These things happen.
Yeah, super weird, because when you first tested it, it looked really great.
Yeah. And it looks fine from here. Okay, I just sent those to you, Erin.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and share again, and until Kate or I receive it, we will just go with blurry.
Okie dokie.
Thanks, Tara.
I'll be sure to convert any text to speech until then. Let me get rid of this. Okay. All right, so yeah, I think I left off. I was saying, oh yes, I got my PhD here at Dartmouth, and I do a lot of material science, ice mechanics, both modeling and in the lab. And just so nobody thinks that all that we do as scientists is do science, I am also a cat mom, a belly dancer, a Ren Fair performer, a forever DM. I have lots of other things going on, so not just science. But I am here today to talk to you about the science. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work, some of the work that I did in my PhD, looking at two different things, both of them having to do with permeability and porosity. First in modeling, and then we're going to move down to the lab and talk about some lab results. So this first part, we're going to talk about the impact of permeability and porosity relationships on the modeled growth dynamics and properties of saline ices. Now, specifically, I want to know, like, does it matter what permeability porosity function I use in my model? And if it does, how is that going to change the permeability factor and affect my model results? So these are the kind of aspects that we're going to be looking at in this first part. So to start with, I'm going to be talking all about salty ice today, not pure ice, because we know that Europa's ice is not pure. It's not fresh. There's stuff in it. Specifically, we do know that there's different kinds of salt. And we've known based on Earth-ocean studies that adding salt to water changes everything about how that ice forms when you freeze the salty liquid. And as you can hopefully still kind of see from the plot here on the left, one of the big influences that salt has on freezing water is that it depresses the freezing point. This is why we salt our roads to melt the ice. If you live up north, you're probably very familiar with this. JPL folks, maybe not as much, but it is what we do. But different salts are able to depress the freezing point to different degrees. Some are better at it than others. So that's what that plot on the left is showing, the freezing point depression of a couple of different salts over a range of concentrations. And that's just as a visual example. Those aren't the exact salts that we're looking at, but that gives you an idea of the range. But because the amount of salt in the water isn't always uniform on really small scales, it leads to some really neat dynamics and heterogeneities during freezing. So, like, instead of a solid sort of linear freezing front like we see in fresh ice, which is the image in the middle on the top, in salty water we get a dendritic freezing effect with these sort of snowflake-like patterns on the bottom you see down here.
Hey,
And this gives
Tara, I'm
yeah.
sorry, I took over for you, but now I'm not sure if I'm on the slide you think that we're on.
Okay,
So,
I am on slide 4.
Which number is, sorry, can you, okay, slide 4. Okay, I'm good.
Yep, says salty
All right,
ice 101.
Just let me know when you want me to forward.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. All right, so yes, freezing point depression in the plot on the left. In the center, we're showing the different growth patterns that we see in fresh ice versus saline ice. So you can see the fresh ice has that really linear freezing front, where the saline ice has the dendritic pattern, like little Christmas trees or snowflakes or something very fingery. And this gives us different ice structure too, as you might imagine, which is what I'm showing on the far right. The top shows a vertical slice of columnar fresh ice under polarized light. And you can see how the crystal structure is really linear and clean. There's really distinct boundaries. While the one on the bottom shows the same thing, but for saline ice, which looks a lot more ragged, less clear. And just looking at these two images, you can probably guess that fresh ice and salty ice are going to have very different properties and behave very differently, especially when we stress them. And so that's kind of some background that I want us to be thinking about as we move through the rest of the talk today. So in the absence of some dedicated spacecraft missions being out there, out at Europa and Jupiter yet, so not since the 90s, but the Europa we know has a super thick ice shell. There's almost certainly tons of liquid water, but there's still a lot of important info that we need to nail down before we can really understand it. And so we try to constrain a lot of the values like salinity, ice thickness, porosity, etc., with models. And this brings us to sort of the crux of my problem for this first part, is that most geophysical models still rely on physical parameters based on fresh ice or Earth sea ice, which is sodium chloride dominated. These are things like stress-strain relationships, rheological constants, all of these things that are very, very basic geophysics problems. But because fresh ice and sodium chloride ice are not the same as, say, magnesium sulfate ice or sodium carbonate ice, models are likely incorrect in their assumptions of things like ice strength, porosity, thermodynamics, maybe other things. And at this point, there have been really few lab studies that have looked at bulk behavior of multi-salt ice grown naturally. Now, when I say bulk behavior, I mean not just single ice crystals or microscale experiments, but working on the centimeter to meter scales. And when I say naturally, I'm talking about top-down solidification, like you'd find on an ocean or a lake, which is the way that these oceans likely froze up to begin with. But the bottom line is that we need to understand the mechanical behavior of planetary relevant ices for accurate forward modeling and interpreting our spacecraft data. And
So,
that's really
Sarah,
like my, what's that?
I'm so sorry. So I just remember I'm forwarding your slides, so you just need to tell me when to.
Oh my gosh, I'm so
forward.
sorry.
It's okay. I think I got it right that time, but just going forward, just make sure you tell me next slide so I can.
Yep, will do. Sorry.
No worries.
All right, so yep, sorry to make you click through all of those. There was a whole lot of things there, but all of that is just to say that, yes, we need to understand the mechanical behavior of our planetary relevant ices for accurate forward modeling and for interpreting our spacecraft data. And so that's kind of my reason for being here. The work that I have done for my PhD and even a little before that is all with the intent of helping to address this. Next slide, please. So to start, let's go through some vernacular to make sure we're all on the same page. First off, let's look at porosity and permeability. And I think this graphic here illustrates the two really well. Essentially, porosity is the space between grains in a medium. Permeability is a measure of how hard it is for a fluid to flow through those spaces between grains. So another way to think of it is how connected the pore spaces are. And when I say fluid here, I'm talking about either liquid or gas. So in our system, we can think of salt water and air. Next, please. We're also going to talk a lot about mushy zones. So the mushy zone is a two-phase region, solid and liquid, that exists behind the freezing front in our saline ice. And as the ice is forming, it's trapping lots of pockets of brine, sometimes creating these cool channels that allow the brine to flow through the ice. So this mushy zone is really just an area of ice with a really high liquid fraction, a lot of heterogeneity. But it isn't stationary, it moves with the freezing front, so it's always going to be at the interface between the ice and the ocean. Next slide, please. Oh, and you might have to click that one twice to get the video to play. So yeah, there's honestly a lot of reasons why I care about ice permeability, but let's talk about how permeability affects some other ice properties that we care about, especially for our planetary ices. So the video here playing on the left is a simulation of ice growing from a salty ocean, which you can see as it's growing, it's rejecting a lot of the salt so that it goes back into the liquid rather than being caught up in the ice. So this means that the act of freezing specifically increases the salinity of your underlying ocean. And if our ice is permeable, if unfrozen brine can still flow out of the ice, then we have even more salt in the ocean, meaning it's harder to grow more ice. So in a very real sense, the permeability of ice has a big effect on how fast it can grow and how much salt gets trapped in the ice. And oops, sorry about that. And when it comes to our planetary ices, these are things that we really want to know, like how thick is the ice layer? How salty is it compared to the ocean? These are all related to ice permeability, which we also don't know and don't currently have a good way to find out. So we really want models that can estimate these things accurately. Next slide, please. Now, as I alluded to a little bit ago, permeability and porosity are indeed related, and people have come up with mathematical ways to describe these relationships based on experiments or sometimes just math. I'm going to talk about 3 of them for this section, which you see here. We have the Kozeny-Kármán, the cubic, and the log functions. And the plot on the right shows the relationship between porosity and permeability for each of those functions over the full porosity range, so from 0 to 1. One thing I want you to notice, and if you'll click one more time, Kate, one thing I want you to notice is that each of these functions includes this K0 factor. This is called the permeability factor. And in a real world setting, it's used to combine a couple of hard to measure properties of a permeable solid, including capillary size is one of the big ones. So if we think about this like pipe flow, we know that a wider pipe will allow more flow through and vice versa. So the permeability factor really acts as a limiter to your fluid flow. And this factor is going to be radically different for different systems. So a lot of times when modelers are setting up their simulations, they're making an estimate of what this K0 value should be. However, nobody seems to have really looked at how changing this permeability factor in your model affects the properties of the ice that's grown. So things like ice thickness, ice salinity, and porosity are all likely to be affected. And that's one of the things we want to understand with this part of the study. Likewise, there hasn't been a really comprehensive look at how your choice of which function to use affects those same ice properties. So that's what I did. Next slide, please. Just a little bit of detail. This is kind of in the weeds, but I still like to put it out there for any other modelers. This is a bit of detail as how this K0 is implemented in our specific model. We're using a model called softball, solidification, flow, and thermodynamics in binary alloys. Thanks to Jamie Parkinson back from 2020. Love this binary solidification model. But I'm going to be talking moving forward a lot about a factor called reluctance, because in some solidification models like softball, this is tied to the permeability factor that we care about. And that's because these models use a setup known as Healy-Shaw cells, where the model that we act like is running in 2D is actually quasi-2D, they call it. So in reality, this would be the equivalent of growing ice between like 2 panes of glass that are really, really close together, like growing ice in an ant farm. But it turns out if your plates are spaced closely enough together, the fluid moving through the system behaves in ways that match Darcy's law. So we can have an almost 3D system without having to solve the full Navier-Stokes at each step. So this gives us a computationally cheaper setup without sacrificing accuracy. So this reluctance term is what softball uses to set the width of that Healy-Shaw cell. Now it's also a relationship between that width D and, ta-da, the permeability factor that we care about. So in a minute, I'm going to be referencing a lot of R values, and so that's what I'm talking about here. You can just think of reluctance as a proxy for the permeability factor. I just wanted to make all of that clear. So using that model, softball, I set up a bunch of ice freezing simulations. So first I ran simulations using all the same parameters, but with different permeability porosity functions, and then tracked the results for ice final thickness, bulk salinity, and porosity. Then I started over again with those same simulations, this time varying both K0 and the function to see what happens there. I did the first round of these simulations growing regular old Earth sea ice because we know a lot about that and what it's supposed to look like and what these values should be. But then I ran them again using properties for Europa to see if the behavior that we see in the Earth system would follow us to a system with different thermodynamics and on a much larger scale. So here's the results that we get for our Earth-based modeling. And on each of these plots, I've shown all three functions and all three different reluctance values, or K-naught values. So looking at these one at a time, for our ice thickness, our highest K-naught value, all of the porosity permeability functions gave us the same ice thickness. Awesome, we love it. But when you start to vary that K-naught value, our ice thickness starts to decrease as we decrease K-naught. And this happens across all of our functions, but it's the most noticeable in the cubic function, where our lowest K-naught gave us a 13% reduction in ice thickness from the highest K-naught, which I think is pretty significant. Now for bulk salinity, all of our ices that were grown in the model decreased in salinity by about the same amount, usually between like 78 and 81%. So you see there's a lot of variability through the depth, so it can kind of be hard to see, but indeed our highest K-naught value gave us the highest salinity values for all three functions. And as we vary both K-naught and the function, the salinity does vary a little bit, but not in a predictable way. But we do see that the variation of the bulk salinity in the ice of about 3%. For porosity, we see that our porosity decreases as K-naught decreases. So between the different functions, the cubic function consistently gives us the highest porosity values. The cosine, Kármán, and log are a little bit less, no matter which K-naught value you use. So overall, for the Earth system, we do see that there are differences when we vary either or both the K-naught values and the porosity permeability functions. Though at this point, the differences appear to be pretty small at this scale. We're talking a couple of centimeters here and there. But it does translate to, you know, a 10%, 10 to 13%, so not insignificant. But the big difference between that and switching to our Europa system are a couple of things. If you'll click twice, Kate. Here you can see we've made a couple of changes that go into our softball parameters. The big ones that I'll have you notice I've kind of pointed out with arrows here. We have the eutectic temperature between our Earth sodium chloride based ocean and our Europa magnesium sulfate ocean. Big difference in eutectic temperature. Also, the eutectic composition is quite different. You'll see a big difference in the linear liquidus slope, or you can think of that as kind of how fast it will freeze. We've also increased the domain size. So our Earth-based ones were on the meter scale, 2 by 2. Europa, we couldn't get all the way up to kilometer scales, but we did 100 meters by 800 meters to sort of mimic this change, drastic change in scale. If you will click 2 more times, Kate, sorry, you'll get to the Europa results. So these were done at the same starting salinity as the Earth results. I think you saw on the last one, 35 ppt. And here again for our ice thickness, we see that it decreases with decreasing K-naught, and by different amounts for each of the different functions. So you can tell for our log function, we have a decrease of 28.6%, which is even more than the 13% decrease in the Earth system. So it means the difference in actual ice thickness in the Europa system per this model would be about 75 meters, which could be pretty consequential. Now for bulk salinity, we not only see that our choice of K-naught gives us different values, but also different behavior. You can see the low K-naught runs all have this weird dip and bump feature right at the very top that we don't see in the higher reluctance runs. I do think this is real and indicative of a physical process that's happening, so it's not just an artifact. This is just something that is happening when your permeability factor gets really low. So there's even different processes being represented by these different K-naught values. Now, the fact that the general behavior varies with K-naught more so than the values between the different functions tells us that the choice of permeability factor is a big deal for this system. Now, for porosity, there's not a ton to see here, honestly. Our porosity values are all really consistent between all of our K-naught values and functions. Porosity is just incredibly low throughout the ice. There's a tiny bump up in the mushy zone at the very bottom, and that's about it. And we'll look at this a bit more closely in the next section, but right now that's what we're seeing from our models. So what has all of this told us? Well, we see that varying either our permeability porosity function in your model or using a different permeability factor can significantly change your results. So if you care about precision with things like ice thickness, bulk salinity, or porosity in particular, you need to choose your parameters wisely and likely need to be able to defend that choice. And these were just 3 factors that we investigated. It could influence other parameters too. We also find that your both your choice of function and K-naught value become increasingly important as your domain size goes up, or as you vary other properties of the system, like ocean composition. So my big push with this chapter is to just make people aware that if we're going to rely so heavily on models for understanding planetary ice shells, we need to be sure we're aware of how our assumptions about permeability affect our results, because they do in fact matter. All right, off my soapbox, next slide. We'll move on to part 2, which is taking this from the computer upstairs down into the basement lab. And we're going to be talking about experimental porosity of planetary ice analogs using micro-CT, microcomputed tomography. And so especially the questions here I'm looking at are, how do changes in composition affect porosity development? And do existing sea ice relationships hold? We just saw that in models, sea ice, Earth sea ice behaves a bit differently than Europa ocean and ice. So we want to see if that relationship holds down in the lab. Next slide, please. So first up, a little more about why we care about porosity and permeability, aside from a mechanics standpoint, which is my thing, or a modeling standpoint, which a lot of people care about. Porosity and permeability are also really important for astrobiology. Microbial life in particular loves a permeable system. So if your pore spaces are connected in a way that liquid can move through them, then as a little microbe, you have access to a variety of habitats. You've got a way to move between them. You've got a system that can bring in fresh nutrients and remove waste. And you've probably even got space for more microbes and even different kinds. So for understanding how permeability manifests in our planetary ices, that can really help us understand the astrobiologic potential of these icy shells. Next slide, please. So like we talked about way back at the beginning, the kinds of salt that we find in oceans on Earth versus Europa, and I'm also including Enceladus a little bit in this chapter, are all different and cause the ice to form with different inherent properties. So one way that salt affects ice as it's growing is by increasing its porosity. More salt equals more pore space. And people have known about this in sea ice since at least 1928. That's when it was first published. It was probably known a long time before that. But probably the most fundamental formal treatment of this relationship comes from these equations, first by Frankenstein and Garner, who gave us a way to calculate brine volume from salinity and temperature. So later Cox and Weeks added an air volume to that. And if you plot out these equations, you can see that according to these, it should be a mostly linear relationship. But there's a few things that we can notice here. And if you'll click one more time, Kate. Primarily, there are a handful of terms in these equations that are specific to Earth sea ice. Because these were originally found based on fits to experimental data from field samples, and there's even a few lookup functions involved because it was the 60s, man. So one thing I'm interested in is whether or not we can still use these equations to reliably calculate salinity and porosity in non-Earth ices. Next, please. So the first thing I did here was do a quick modeling effort using softball again to see how the model's porosity output responded to changes in the chemistry of the system. So this involved just running a whole bunch of simulations with different salinity inputs and then taking the average porosity of the ice grown in each case. And already we see that we should probably expect some differences. The mostly linear trend still holds, but the porosity of the ice that's grown is wildly different depending on the composition. And again, all I changed between these systems was the type of salt. But I promised we were moving away from models, so let's actually get into the cold rooms and grow some ice. Next slide, please. Because obviously we're not going out to these moons to collect samples yet. Instead, we make our own down in the ice lab. So we mix up whatever ocean we need in our big Nalgene bucket, put a cold plate on top, set it to -20, wait for about a month, insulate the sides so that we can guarantee that directional freezing that we want, the top-down freezing. That's what gives us the crystal structure that we think best mimics what we would expect to find on the icy moons. So it's the same way that ice freezes, like I said, from the top down on the ocean. So after between 4 and 6 weeks, we extract our ice block, cut it up for testing. And these ice blocks are usually about 33 centimeters across, between 30 and 50 centimeters thick. So we are working on decently sized scales here. On the right, I've listed the particular ice blocks that we grew and tested for this. The bolded text there shows the dominant salt in each of the systems. I've included Enceladus results here too, because I think it gives good insight into how complex these systems can be and the different kind of things we need to consider. So I'll be addressing Europa and Enceladus for this part. So the way that we're testing for porosity is using micro CT, which is basically like taking X-rays of our ice to look at the interior structure. So to do this, we cut out 2 centimeter cubes throughout the depth of the block and then do it again. So we have 2 samples for each 2 centimeters of ice depth. So then each cube is scanned in the micro CT, which produces 2D images that can be combined and reconstructed to make the entire cube. So I will skip some of the details on that, but we do this for each of our ice blocks. That allows us to measure the porosity, and then we can compare them. So let's talk about what we found. First, our results for total porosity. Total porosity includes all of the non-ice material. So that's brine, solid salts, and air. Now, one thing that we found is that in all cases, the porosity of the ice increased with increasing salinity, which is what we expected based on our sea ice studies and also my quick and dirty modeling. But I also confirmed that the slope of this increase isn't the same between the ices of different chemistries, which is also what we saw in the model. Porosity increases between low and high salinity Europa samples was not the same as the increase for the low and high Enceladus samples. And overall, the porosity for Enceladus was the lowest of our 3 chemistries, with Europa in the middle and sea ice as the most porous. Now, I also asked whether or not the porosity changes with depth in an ice block, and there's reasons why one might feel that it should. But surprisingly, we found out that there isn't any sort of trend to this. For all of our blocks that we tested, we found that the total porosity was either mostly constant through the depth or it was totally scattered. There's no trend to it. So one reason that this feels strange is because visually, just looking at the ice with your eyeballs, there's definitely differences in the pore locations and distributions and sizes between the different ices. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. I have here some 3D reconstructions of a few of our ice samples. I chose 1 low salinity and 1 high salinity sample for each of our planetary chemistries, plus 1 seawater one to show you. I used the micro CT output to characterize locations of air-filled pores versus entrained salt or brine, and so I've displayed those differently. Air-filled pores in orange or yellowish, entrained salt and brines in the blue. So let's look at our Earth ice case first, since that's sort of our benchmark. And this is pretty standard for what we expect from sea ice. You see a lot of little pockets of brine or solid salts dotted through there, as well as some really large air-filled pores and linear channels running through the ice. Now, these are brine channels, and even though they show up as air here, it's because the brine that was in them is able to drain out when I cut up the ice. Again, because of permeability. But you can see there's a lot of open connected pore spaces that a little microbe could swim around in and kind of get places. Now let's look at the Europa ones. At low salinity, we see, again, some smatterings of solid salts and other entrained salt and brine. We also see it kind of looking almost linear in a fashion. If you can see, I don't know how your resolution is, but there are sort of features that swoop down in the blue that are probably tracing along maybe some crystal boundaries or something like that. But we also see a little bit of the air-filled pores in there. They're not quite as big as the ones in the seawater. Again, this is the low salinity. We also see they're not connected. They're large, but they're not linear like the Earth samples were. Now, looking at that high salinity Europa, we start to see, as we've added more salt to the system, we are getting those brine channels forming, those linear formations in the bright orange there. And a lot more entrained salt and brine just sort of smattered throughout. Now, if we compare this to the Enceladus samples, we see something very, very different, which was really unexpected. At low salinity, we are trapping tons of little air bubbles, lots and lots of tiny bubbles, which if I had pictures, I could show you. They're like just little bubbles everywhere, but almost no entrained salt or brine. There's very, very little. When we flip to high salinity, we see a ton of entrained salt and brine and almost no little air bubbles, very few kind of scattered throughout, but still no brine channels forming like we see in our Earth ice and our Europa high salinity ice. And this lack of connected pore spaces really bothered me for a while. We got it all sorted out. In the interest of time, I'm going to actually skip over a lot of this math and Rayleigh numbers and stuff, but we can come back and talk about it at another point. Kate, if you will go click on to slide 23. It says planetary implications. So coming back to our little microbes, this means that Europa and Enceladus may be really different when it comes to the number and the kinds of life that we might find there. Europa seems to be a really great place for microbes to thrive because of these brine channels. It has everything they need, even at lower salinities. Enceladus, however, may not be as nice for microbes if they can't move around and get to new food sources and things like that. Now, one of the big things that I haven't talked about yet in all of this is the effect of gravity. And unfortunately, that's not something we can really control in the lab. I'm working on it, but so far, no luck. So all of our ices are grown at Earth gravity. But we, of course, remember that Europa's gravity is 10 times less, Enceladus's is 100 times less. And that G is a term in Rayleigh number calculations and lots of our ice growth equations. So it is going to make a difference. Right now, I have run some models at different gravity settings to see if we can get a better handle on this. I haven't done all of the analysis yet, so look for more on that soon. But that's a whole project in itself. So kind of wrapping up this section here, next slide, please. Again, we took isos representing ocean chemistries for Earth, Europa, and Enceladus, grew them over a range of salinity values, and our micro-CT scans show that porosity increases with increasing salinity for all of our chemistries, which is what we expected, but it doesn't do so equally. This is especially important because it tells us that Earth-based relations shouldn't be used for planetary ices with different chemistries. It might be a good place to start, but we can do better. We also learned that brine channel development doesn't happen for all salinity and chemistry combinations. We see it a lot in the Earth-based system, only a little bit and only at high salinities for Europa and not at all for Enceladus. This tells me that things like brine density and hydrodynamics play an important role in our ice structure and habitability. But the big thing that I took away from this whole section is that porosity development is super complex. There is so much going on with double diffusion and all sorts of things. It's a complex system, and it's probably not happening in the same way on all bodies. So not all icy moons may make great habitats just because they have liquid. And for the last little bit, I will rush through this really quick. I wanted to talk a little bit about how this is relevant to Europa Clipper instruments and observations, how Clipper observations might impact this work, and vice versa. So it's really a combination of a lot of things that I think will be helpful for this study. Obviously, I'm very interested in MISE's spectral mapping capabilities to help contain what kinds of salt we find on Europa's surface, their abundances, where they are, because we know that this chemistry controls ice structure and strength, and all of these things that I've talked about this whole time. Also very excited for reason. Radar, of course, is sensitive to liquid fractions and impurity contents, so we'll be able to map those in the subsurface, at least better than we have now, which is really great. That can help us kind of connect the meter scale observations that we see to some of the micro scale processes that we're representing with the math and the models. And of course, eThemis is going to be super important for looking at liquid fractions near the surface, which can affect things like reflectance and brightness temperature. So understanding how that works is going to be super important as well. Combining thermal data with our spectral maps can help us separate some of our thermal and chemical drivers as well. And I know that there are plenty of people on this call who know more about these instruments than I do. So I would love to hear from anybody who has more ideas of how we can use these new observations to sort of help us validate some of the stuff we're doing in the lab and vice versa. What can we do in the lab or with new models to help understand the observations that we're going to get back? Next slide. So for ongoing future work, we are, like I said, modeling ice growth and porosity development and creating these porosity salinity curves under the effects of planetary gravity. I'm doing some lab validation of some other ice geochemistry models for a range of salt assemblages and concentrations. We've got some effects of composition on bulk ice strength studies that are ongoing and hopefully publishing soon. That's looking at shear strength, flexure strength, and compression. And we're also adding microbes to our ice. We're doing ice with bugs, effects of how these microbes affect our ice growth, our ice structure, and looking at sort of their distribution and viability, if they're still living or not once they get frozen into ice. So with that, apologize for all of the tech issues and losing a bit of time there, but I will leave you here with some general conclusions, a cat tax, my contact information, and I am happy to take any questions that you might have.
Brava, brava. Very nice, very nice. I think, Erin,
Thank
are you gonna?
Tara. Yeah. Thank you so much, Tara. And yeah, sorry for all of the fun technical issues at the beginning, but we still have some great time for questions. So if you have a question for Tara, please feel free to put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and I'll call on you. I'm going to start with a comment from Bill McKinnon in the chat that says, I wouldn't necessarily discount NaCl for Europa given JWST data. And so I guess I'll turn that into a question a little bit and say, how do you have any ideas on how NaCl at Europa might change your results here?
Yes, for sure. And Kate, I don't know if you're able to move back and forth in the slides, but slide number 18. There.
Yeah,
so
I'm not suggesting you're not aware of it, but I just want to point it out.
Yeah. So when we're talking about especially when we're working down in the lab, the mixtures that we're using for the different oceans are multi-components. So for our Europa mixture, it contains magnesium sulfate, a bit of carbonate, sodium chloride, a couple other things, KCl, all based on the Zolotov and Schock measurements from 2001. So we are including a bit of sodium chloride in our Europa mixture. So that's going into the system. The relative relationship between that sodium chloride and whatever else is in the system is definitely, like, if that changes, it will surely change some of these results. Sodium chloride is way better at depressing the freezing point than magnesium sulfate is. So I would expect if we had an increase in sodium chloride or even sodium chloride dominated, it would be a lot closer to what we see for Earth sea ice. You have to balance out some of the actual relationships there, but it is something that we consider, and that's why we're using the sort of multi-component oceans rather than just doing a binary like mag sulfate kind of thing.
Great, thank you. We have a couple of raised hands. Carly, go ahead.
Hey, this is great. So you did touch on the difference in gravity, and I was kind of interested, especially in some of this work that you've done where you then see the brine channels and things like that. I know you've been coupling that with models. Can you sort of expand on, I mean, lower gravity to me seems like it might allow the ice to form in quite a different way, but I guess, as you say, it's hard to do. It's hard to turn off the gravity in the lab. So is there anything from the modeling that you've done that you can sort of extrapolate into the experimental work that you've done to think about what might happen in a tenth of the gravity?
Yeah, so one of the big things that that we found in the lab is that the density of your brine is really impactful when you're talking about the formation of porosity and especially those brine channels. So the amount and the types of salt that we're putting in are changing our brine density. And so again, that chemistry is going to make a big difference as well when we think about for these brine channels to form, we need a convective overturn happening within them. That's what allows them to stay open. That's what allows them to like move brine through them, reject salt, all of that stuff. Gravity is a big term in that. So if you have to reach a certain density stratification before you get that convective overturn. I'm sure lots of people understand how that works. So when you're reducing your gravity, you potentially don't need as much difference there, as much of a difference in the densities before you can start to get some convective overturn. So it may be happening on Enceladus with this much lower gravity just because the brine density doesn't increase as quickly with the addition of salt. I hope I'm explaining this okay. But reduced gravity should make it easier for these brine channels to form. So it's kind of unclear how big of an effect this will have, but that's one of the things that I'm looking at with the models, is especially focusing on this porosity to see how the gravity affects that.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. And Murthy, you have your hand raised. Go ahead. We can't hear you if you're talking, Murthy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. Tara, nice work. Both lab and modeling. One thing I would like to be clear about in your talk is when you say porosity, do you calculate it by taking non-ice versus ice rather than voids versus material? Because most of the other places porosity is defined as void versus material. And for example, for comets, the porosity is very high, almost 70%. The bulk density is 0.3 grams per cubic centimeter. So my question also connects with your previous comment is, did you also plot the density versus porosity? Because you have all the experimental data there.
Yeah, so yes, when I talk about porosity, generally, I'm thinking about the total non-ice fraction. So in some of the things like I showed, I can split that up between what is air and what is brine. But in the lab, it can be really difficult because, like I said, as soon as I pull that ice out of the bucket and start to cut it up, we have brine loss. So we can still see the relic channels and assume that there was liquid in there. But as far as calculating the exact volume of air versus brine, that gets a little tricky. So I tend to think of them more, especially from the lab's perspective, of just being the non-ice fraction for the total porosity.
Yeah, in that case, that if the brine were to be retained in those channels, the density could be actually much higher than pure water ice density.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, we have maybe one last question in the chat here. What are the implications of your results for ice convection when, for example, when you start to have a little higher pressure? Is there anything you want convection modelers to be more cognizant of? And this is from Alyssa.
Thanks, Alyssa. I think these results could get really complicated when you start to get into a convection system, especially when we're thinking about just porosity in general, because once the ice is warm enough to start convecting, you are going to completely throw off all of your internal structure. It's going to look very different. And these experiments that I've done are at pretty warm temperatures. Everything that was done in the lab here was at -10°C. So that's like pretty close to ice-ocean interface. So we're not thinking so much about the convection. That's still a really warm system, though. So I think once you start convecting and the ice itself is moving around, it's going to get really weird. As far as what modelers can do to help with that, that is a great question, and one that I think would require a bit more thinking on that one. It's not something that I've really spent much time with yet.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much, Tara. And if you have any other questions, I'm sure Tara would love if you reached out to her.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much again for the wonderful talk and for hanging with us through technical difficulties.
Yes, thanks a bunch, everybody.
Thank you.
Tara.
And thanks always to Kate and Pilar for their help in organizing. And we'll see you all next month for the next lecture series. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Tara. Again, sorry about that. Really
Oh.
appreciate it. Amazing job to get it all in and still have time for questions. So
Yes. I'm glad we got it all sorted. Thanks for helping out and flipping slides, and sorry for the 8 times that I forgot to tell you.
Are the slides that you sent me, I can just save those as a PDF and we can keep those on the PSG website. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks again.
Cool, thank you.
Bye, great to see you.
Bye.